As we are making our switch over from our discussion of scientific methods and introducing scientific literature into our unit more focused on details of ways of doing and thinking about science, I thought it worth a moment to discuss our themes a bit. We've already talked about cognitive biases, motivated cognition, and the motivations that drive some thoughts around pseudosciences, such as vaccine refusal. We're going to continue this section by moving into statistics, but I want to ensure that you're seeing the linkage between last week and this week. In our current world, which includes both this class and outside of it, you are now being asked to effectively understand and read about science, even if you're not a scientific expert. You can certainly trust experts, and with an understanding of journal quality, you can have an idea of who to trust. But even with that, good science can be oversold or applied incorrectly in order to sell articles and clicks. In being able to understand and analyze how the headlines are related to the articles and how such things should be believed can be extremely helpful at not being led astray or overbelieving a headline. I love this comic to illustrate this concept, and I will often use it in discussions. Social media is especially good at handing you a clickbait-style headline that isn't backed by much of anything, including the article it is discussing. Science isn't these flashy headlines. It's a system of understanding the world. If all you like is flashy headlines, you don't love science. To take this comic a bit further, you also don't need to marry the thing to prove you love it. The analogy here being you don't have to go get a PhD and spend the rest of your life studying it in order to prove your love. But I do think to love something, you need to have at least a little bit of understanding of it. And here, that understanding comes from learning about the methodology and the philosophy, even if you don't plan to do the science yourself. To do this, you need to have a feel for experimental design and statistics, and that's what this module will focus on. Science is often used as a catch-all term for things that look a bit like science. With the advent of the internet pop culture, science such as red wine can prevent disease gets far more interest than the structure of G-protein coupled receptor with opioid ligand solved. And with this comes a variety of poorly designed experiments that are better suited for headline grabbing than drawing conclusions. Experimental design is really important. Take, for example, these comics. It may seem silly, but it gets across a really important concept. Your experiment can have unintended effects. That means you're measuring something that you never intended to. You have to design experiments very carefully to avoid these things. The perfect example of this is your papers on gluten you talked about in discussion. They thought they controlled for everything, and it was honestly a pretty good experimental design. But when they couldn't come up with any explanation for their results, they went back, they implemented some more controls, or in other words, they fixed their experimental design. Science can also suffer from a lack of high-quality analysis if the experimenters are either unaware or don't care about proper methods or error-prone systems. Statistics can open up extensive possibilities for either vague conclusions, purposeful misrepresentations, or simply mistakes. Additionally, science suffers from the intense and continual need for money. So many economic decisions often take precedence over scientific ones. And even when all of these factors are considered, ethics and recruiting in human studies can hamper experimental design. Luckily, most of these concepts can be caught by rigorous peer review. It is still worthwhile to understand the basic concepts so that you can catch them in articles that sneak past peer review, or that have legitimate reasons for having the issues get published even with the flaws. An additional concept that we're going to address in this section of the course is cognitive fallacies. These, though they shouldn't have a place in scientific analysis, certainly do. They sneak into experimental design. They play a role in which article editors and reviewers are likely to approve. They certainly play a role in how journal articles are converted into news articles, and they play a decisive role in how people will engage with that information once it is in the general public. These biases cannot be separated or completely removed. They can only be identified and minimized, so no discussion of scientific analysis would be complete without a discussion of these topics. This isn't going to be a full-blown stats course, and I hope that your naked statistics readings gave you a general introduction to a lot of concepts. We are going to focus on a few that make a really big impact in scientific literature and the analyses of it, specifically p-hacking, sample size, and narrative building.